And in answer to one of the questions, pizza is good. Anyway, so this is episode 4 Random Books, episode 29, I think. Yes, 29. And as it's just before my birthday, I'm going to not do those little books and do these big books. Because I can. So, the big books today. The theme. Weapons of war. We're going to start off with Fighters Over the Fleet. Naval Air Defense from Biplanes to the Cold War by Norman Friedman. Now, this is a typical Norman Friedman book. It's very well written. It covers a huge amount of information. If I have to pick which one of the books I've got of his that I like least, it is also probably this one, because for a very simple reason, and there is no way to square a circle. And having to cover as many navies, doing as much development as he does have to really encapsulate everyone in his book, means by its nature it's going to end up being repetitive. It's going to feel like it circles back on itself. I found this in my own PhD thesis when I was doing the work. So it's an unavoidable problem. It's something he manages to cope with quite well by having a huge amount of information in there, but it's still there. Now, it has some lovely pictures. It has lovely plans. And it does cover it all, including the Blackburn Rock. For those of you thinking that's a skewer, that's not a skewer. That's the turreted fighter version of the Blackburn skewer, called the Blackburn Rock. You all thought it was only the Bolton Pool Defiant, didn't you? No. There was other turreted fighters. There really was. And some of the joys of when you have a really large number of aircraft and you can fill up your entire flight deck with aircraft, and the joys of operating that, versus when you have quite a full hangar. And you can fill that up. Fighters Over the Fleet is a good book. It is beautifully illustrated and it is beautifully written. But as said, it is repetitive, and there are parts in it which, frankly, again, they come from Norman's perspective, and they come from what is Norman's primary reading versus his secondary reading. And this is the trouble. When you've done so many books, when you develop a certain style, you develop a certain emphasis and a certain history, and it's very difficult to read them without seeing the legacy in that. And in this case, a lot of the things, when you're looking at them, I sometimes wonder whether he would have been better off if he had. There are parts in this book where he goes into a conceptual rather than a national or timeline issue. And he basically goes, this is the concept and this is how the different navies approached it and how they interfaced. And that is a very good section. But there are other sections like this one, Wartime US Fighter Development, Night Fighters and Night Carriers. A vital application of shortwave radar was the night fighters. A narrow beam was valuable because it did not reflect off the sea, swamping the small echo of a target. The British applied microwave technology to night fighters, but Radlab developed night fighter radars which could guide a single-seat fighter. The US Navy needed them because it could not operate large two-seater aircraft from fires. US single-seat night fighters radar was also installed on board the only wartime British carrier night fighter, a version of the Firefly. You see, he's both right and wrong in that statement, because the Royal Navy didn't all fighters would be used for night fighting. All aircraft used for. They didn't all come with radar fitted. They weren't specially adapted as night fighters. They'd be used for it. That's the difference. And so, in that sort of phrase, when you read it that way, it sounds like the Britain is quite weak and da 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 da. When you add in the context, it shows you have two different nations who, under different circumstances, have pursued different policies because they have different constraints on their resources and requirements. They're both quite good systems. Let's be honest, the Americans having specialist is going to produce the most perfect result. The British going for generalist is going to produce the most viable for them result, because they don't know where they could be operating their carriers anywhere. Fighting the Great War at Sea: Strategy, Tactics, and Technology. Well, he covers two of these areas rather well. And I would always say I teach this when I use this book in teaching, as I go that. Because it does strategy well and does technology well, but I don't think it does tactics well. And I don't think it's going to sound strange again. For Norman to be able to do strategy, tactics, and technology and bring it all together and do it all, there are going to be compromises because of making the history viable. And it's good, but let's go to, and again, there are the normal pictures, plans, maps, lovely things in here. It's all gorgeous as always. But let's go with it was reported in mid-1912 that both 14-inch guns and mountings had failed their tests, and were reported on adversely by the German naval authorities. At the time, the Koenig class were commenced to discern that much consideration was being given to a gun larger than 12-inch. And if at that time they had possessed the successful design of gun and mechanism, it is considered extremely probable that such a gun would have been arranged for rather than 12-inch. It therefore occurs to the committee that the tech Germans may have looked ahead and made their turrets and mountings for the ships of the Koenig class, so that they would take a 14-inch gun when it was found possible to mount a gun of that size, which could be accepted. It's therefore considered quite possible that in the meantime the difficulties have been surmounted, and the 14-inch guns may, in sufficient numbers, be placed in the completed vessels free of this class. The committee agreed that the British would find great difficulties in such an operation as regards ammunition, but the Germans might not, because they apparently already used the 14-inch gun for coastal defence. There seemed to be no valid reasons not to imagine the Koenigs completing at the outbreak of war had been rearmed. It was much less likely that the Kaisers were involved, because when the first of them was laid down, the Germans had only just placed their 12-inch gun in service. All of this was a misreading of what was happening in Germany. No one in the Royal Navy realised how long it took the Germans to get from concept to completed ship. The more powerful armament under consideration in 1910 applied not to the Koenigs, but to the class which would follow them, the 15-inch gun burdens. The Germans did not indeed hope to overtake the British with a new gun, but it was with a 15-inch chosen before the British decided to arm the Queen Elizabeth with a gun of that caliber. The British naval industry and the Royal Navy technical establishment were far more agile than the Germans. Krupp's secretiveness hid the fact that it moved ponderously. The 14-inch gun was planned for a new class of battlecruisers. What could be done was not what would be done. I agree. I would also say that at this point, I would be pointing out that the Royal Navy cannot afford to plan and would be remiss in their duties if they presume a plan based on the assumption that the enemy is significantly worse and less agile in their procurement practices than they are. Because if you plan for that in terms of your own construction, and let's be honest, construction of ships is by far and away the longest and most difficult process you can be going for, then the odds are at no point will you be surprised in a negative way. If you are surprised and find out the enemy are not as capable as you presume them to be, that is not a negative surprise. That is a wonderful surprise. That is a joyous thing. That makes us all happy. If the other way, you could lose ships. This way, so this is what I think. As I said, he has sections on strategy, which are very good, and he has sections on technology, which are very good. Tactics, because it's linking all those things up again, and it's linking the whole things up, and it's a complicated task to do. It is really complicated. I did it for my PhD thesis. I did it for my book. Linking strategy, tactics, and all. And for my PhD thesis, I was looking at just naval aviation. For my book, I was looking at just free class of destroyer. Norman is attempting to do it for entire fleets, not just one fleet, entire fleets. It's a good starting point. He has provided a very good foundation to move on from. This is a very good book to read to get a starting point, like so many of his other works are. But because it is attempting to cover so much ground, because it is attempting to provide such a big picture, it cannot hope to provide detail in terms of the nuance. It just don't. It can't. Or the book will be 4 volumes and about 5 times the size. But from books which I have to 2 books which, frankly, are my favourites of his, and I have the 3rd one coming, but it hasn't arrived yet. Volumes 1 and 2. Of British naval weapons of World War II, the John Lambert collections, destroyer weapons, escort minesweeper weapons, all sorts of things are coming out. These are glorious works, and they have got all the technical drawings. If you're a modeler, if you're into 3D printing of your own designs, these are gorgeous books, and these are some of the most beautifully written books. Because the thing is, as I've tried to point out, Norman is very good at what he does. He really does understand it. And in the problem with those books, they're trying to cover so much. That's where the problems come in. In this one, because it's able to focus down, in these books, because they're able to focus down, because they are, that much more narrow in their focus, they are excellent. Because he's able to apply all that knowledge in a very focused way. And this is a beautiful example of that. The fact there are multiple volumes and there are more coming out is just it's even better. And as I said, I cannot sing their praises highly enough. They are gorgeously put together books. They are really some of the best, because all that knowledge, you can see the Friedman books I have behind me, the Friedman books I've talked about on previous occasions, the Friedman book I've got all round my room. Norman produces good books. They're good foundational books, but as I said, they often try and include so much concepts that's where they get the problems. Because they're trying to cover so much, you can't cover so much in nuance. These books, they are focused enough to allow Norman to get into the nuance, and he is good at the nuance. I have heard him speak. He is good at the nuance. So, these books, gorgeous. Right, that's another 4 random books. Hope you enjoyed it, and take care. Thank you as always to all my subscribers. Thank you to everyone who's pressed the little bell down there. Thank you to everyone who is just a watcher or a patron. Patrons are amazing. They allow me to keep up my book habit. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.